Don't be afraid of Sanskrit. We're going to be reading the sutras in Sanskrit. Look, I even wore my t-shirt for you. Look at that. Don't be afraid of the Sanskrit. Okay, it's a Indo-European language. It's our cousin, like the Indians say, cousin bhai. It's a cousin bhai. It's a related language. No, nothing to fear. So even if you're never going to learn it, let it go into your mind. Just let the words go in. Just engage the words. Don't be afraid. That's why we're going to be reading the sutras. So the invocation says in Sanskrit, last line is a namaha. So why are we doing namaha? Well, yogena chittasya, padena vacham, malam sharirasya chavaidya yo apakarot, to the one who brought. Brought what? Yogena chittasya, yoga for the mind, padena vacham, grammar for language. And what else? Malam sharirasya chavaidya medicine for the ills of the body. That's quite a set of gifts. Normally, rishis are associated with one thing. Munis, they give one thing. Right? Dhanvantari gives Ayurveda, but this Patanjali gives three completely amazing and very different things. Meditational praxis, grammar. There's a Patanjali that wrote a huge commentary on the famous, amazing grammar of Panini in the, 3rd, 4th century BCE. That grammar was written and by Panini, which basically then formed classical Sanskrit. Classical Sanskrit is molded on the grammar of Panini. Well, Patanjali writes a commentary on that. It's a huge thing. Yoga Sutras is 200 sutras. Panini grammar is more than 4,000 sutras. So, to the one who brought yoga for the mind, grammar for speech, and if that wasn't enough, tradition says, Malam sharirasya chavaidya kena. He brought medicine for the ills of the body. So that's a pretty hefty set of gifts to humanity from a traditional point of view. So therefore, that's someone like that is worthy of great namaha. So yo apakaro tam, to that one, pravaram muninam, best of the munis, best of the sages. Patanjalim, finally he gets named in the last line, Patanjalim. And now what? Now we've created the mind is in a mood of gratitude for these gifts. We've brought the teacher into mind, Patanjali. Then what do we do in the last line? Pranjalir anatosmi. Asmi, I am. Pranjalir, in a state, I am in a state with my hands, Pranjali. This is Pranjalir, with my hands like this. And anato, this is a num word, past passive participle. Anato, I'm in a state of namaha with my Pranjali, my hands like that. And I'm offering respect to this amazing being, this Patanjali, the tradition says, did those four things. Of course, scholars will, this workshop is not going to be, this is a workshop for practitioners. I'm going to be teaching from a traditional lens, not a scholarly lens. Scholars are going to quibble or say, well, there's no, we don't have anything by any Patanjali in Ayurveda. And, oh, well, how do we know that Patanjali, the grammarian, is the same as the Patanjali of the Yoga Sutras? And then they write articles and have conferences and chitta-vritti away. But that will not be our method in this workshop. We're going to be teaching, I'm assuming many of you are engaging this text as practitioners, and that you're seeking some kind of a source of guidance in your spiritual journeys and your practice, and that's the mode that I'll be teaching from a traditional point of view. Okay, so the second verse then is Patanjali as most of the these beings that tradition associates with the sutras or other bodies of learning tend to be forms of Ishvara or some kind of avatar or some kind of a manifestation of a divine being. Let's just leave it vague like that. So the tradition says Patanjali is actually Shesha, who is the amazing cosmic serpent upon whom Vishnu reclines when creating the universes. Vishnu reclines on Shesha, and in the beginning, on the waters, on the oceans, and from all the pores of Vishnu's body emanate millions, infinite number of universes, and then Vishnu manifests within each universe. So he manifests countless Vishnus, and one per universe. And within that universe, Vishnu again lies on the water. And this is all relevant because the story we're going to read is going to be connected to this. And Vishnu then on that water, who is he reclining on? Shesha. This is all Leela, of course. Vishnu, God doesn't need to recline on anything. But in order to create a beautiful meditational possibility for us, then Vishnu manifests these amazing situations. One of which is he reclines on Shesha with 1,000 heads. Why 1,000 heads? Well, because God's glories are unlimited. Surely an unlimited being has unlimited qualities, unlimited glories. So each head of Shesha is reciting the glories of Vishnu, and no head says the same thing as the other head, and neither does any head repeat itself. Such are the infinite glories of Bhagavan. So that's Shesha, that's the cosmic snake, Sahasrashirsha. So the second verse is a sort of encapsulation of that, of Shesha. So Abahu Purusha Akaram, he's half serpent, half male, although in actual fact, the real Shesha is completely serpent. So I don't know where this half comes from, because the actual Shesha is not half, he's a full serpent. But anyway, we won't quibble about that. It's irrelevant from the point of view of a devotional meditation. So Abahu Purusha Akaram. So Shankha Chakra Asidarinam, this is Vishnu. He has 4 arms and he holds the club, the Shankha, the conch, Shankha Chakra, the disc, and then Asi, which is unusual for Vishnu. Again, this is a very unusual verse because Vishnu does not hold a sword. He holds a club and a lotus in the other 2 arms. Let's not worry about that. You conjure up this image, Shankha Chakra Asidarinam. You make an image in the mind when we do an invocation. We create this image, Shankha Chakra Asidarinam. Sahasrashirsha, 1,000 heads. Shvetam, white. Shesha's white. Different deities are different colors. Krishna's black. The Shesha happens to be white. And then now we have our image. What do we do? Pranamami Patanjalim. Then we offer a namaha. So tradition then associates the Patanjali of the Yoga Sutras, as they say, on the one hand, as in the sort of historical point of view, a sage who brought these 3 wonderful gifts to humankind, but at the same time considers him to be actually in his sort of more cosmic or in his sort of transcendent presence. He's a form of Vishnu. Vishnu has infinite forms, one of which is the gorgeous and amazing Shesha. Okay. So yoga. So the first sutra then we find in Patanjali. So that's Patanjali. Well, let's just quickly say something about what a sutra is, because the Yoga Sutras is not the name of the text. Sutra is a genre of writing, a style of writing. So it's not like it's the name of a book. It is a sutra is a genre of writing. So like we have epic, and we have poetry, and we have, we have computer language, and we have newspaper language, and we have sort of different genres, styles of writing that are appropriate for different subject matters. So poetry is embellishment and sort of onomatopoeia and a meter and rhyme, and it has certain characteristics which sutras don't. So sutras are a style of writing that was a bit, the closest thing perhaps in our culture would be like, technical manuals, like a computer manual, which it just gives you condensed in the old days. And remember when computers first came out, they had this great big book, like 200 pages, and nobody read it except real computer nerds. Nowadays, they just give you a sheet of paper, with like, okay, hit this button. All right, okay, hit that one, doesn't work. Okay, call 800 number. But in the old days, so sutras are kind of that type of, essentially the nature. Okay, what's the characteristic of a sutra? Epic is another style, like the Mahabharata, an epic style. So what's the characteristic of a sutra is minimalism. You have to compound the maximum amount of information in the most minimal to absolute obscurity, to them in the most minimal amount of verbiage, of words. The average length of a sutra is 6 words, because they have to be memorized for one reason. And this is a short sutra, but some sutras, you know, like I said, the Paninian grammar is 4,000. If you're a little Brahmana boy in the Gurukula school at 5 years of age, you're memorizing an enormous amount of information. So the sutras are meant to be just sort of preserved in the most minimalistic type of way. And of course, the flip side of that, or the corollary of that, is they are usually or often, in the case of Vedanta, always incomprehensible. You can't just read the sutra. So therefore you have to have, it has to be unpacked for you. And therefore sutra traditions have their commentaries. You never study a sutra without commentary. The commentary tells you what the sutra means. Of course, in the old days, it would be unpacked by a live teacher. Vedanta, before the first commentary on Vedanta, there would have been centuries and centuries of oral transmission. So the fact that, you know, say Shankara has written the first commentary that we know in the 8th century, but he himself refers to previous teachers. That's the Vedanta Sutra. So Yoga Sutra then, the first commentary is written by Vyas. And his commentary is inextricable, inseparable from the sutras. We don't understand many of the sutras. So Vyas tells us what they mean. You never study the sutras without Vyas. So what we call the Yoga Sutras is really, when we study yoga, what we call yoga philosophy nowadays is really the Yoga Sutras as interpreted by Vyas. Vyas tells us what they mean. Okay, so then we have a commentarial tradition that goes on for a few centuries, and we'll be looking at the pre-modern ones. I'm not personally, you know, my focus is the pre-modern commentaries. All right, so that's what a sutra is then, and it's a style of writing, and there's lots of sutra. The Vedanta Sutra, I just referred to, Nyaya Sutra, Mimamsa Sutra, Vaisheshika Sutra, and they keep getting compiled. You know, Bhakti Sutras comes centuries later. Okay, so there we are, and the first sutra. So we've got about 198 sutras in 4 chapters, 4 padas, and we'll be looking at some of those in this workshop. So the first sutra, and I'll use the first sutra as a springboard to then talk about the history of, a little bit of the prehistory of, when I say the pre-Patanjalian history of yoga. And then after that, then the rest of the workshop will just be reading Patanjali. Sometimes we'll read a story, which is a lot more fun. Because another thing I should probably say, sutras are highly scholastic. They're not read by Hindus, typically. They're read by very rare, you know, elite, small group of male brahmanas, traditionally, historically. So this is, you'd have to be a brahmana to study the sutras, and you'd have to know, you know, Sanskrit, which would take you years, Paninian Sanskrit. And so it's a very scholastic text. Now we're reading it because, you know, postural yoga has become so popular in the West, and so it's kind of brought the sutras along with it, because in the Yoga Sutras there's 3 sutras dedicated to asana, and you have to, you know, if you're a traditional Brahmin like Krishnamacharya was and Shivananda, you can't just make stuff up. You can't just, you know, make up some new thing. To be a traditional Brahmana means that you, in your mind, you're following tradition. You can't just make stuff up. That's not what tradition is, by definition. Tradition, by definition, is you're perpetuating what you perceive to be ancient teachings. And so therefore, all of this sudden emphasis on asana, which emerges in the Maharaj of, Udaipur's palace there, with Krishnamacharya in his studio next to the bodybuilding gym of Yogananda Paramahamsa's brother. So all of a sudden you get this massive emphasis on postural yoga, but Krishnamacharya was a very orthodox Brahmana and a great pundit and a great scholar. So therefore, he found ways of connecting everything with Yoga Sutras, and also he claimed there were other texts. So anyway, that's another story. And there's some good books on that if you're interested. You might want to read Yoga Body by Mark Singleton on this sort of history of how does yoga come to be this postural stuff we do on our main streets and high streets. So here we are reading the Yoga Sutras, here we are, and sort of as part of our yoga teacher training courses, but it's actually a scholastic text. So Hindus get their yoga not from the sutras, they get it from stories. And I want to give you a sense of that, and we'll be reading a story, and you'll get the same philosophy powerfully presented, but in a much more lively and mentally engaging format of a story. So we're doing something like, the equivalent would be, I don't know, how many Christians are reading Augustine or Thomas Aquinas or the early church fathers like Origen or Tertullian? A few might be in seminaries, a few intellectuals here and there, but most Christians don't read any of that stuff. What do they read? The New Testament and the stories of the saints. So that may be a rough analogy. We're reading the sort of really, this is scholastic text. So if you find it dense and dry and demanding, well, it should be. That's the nature of a sutra. Okay. So whenever we get bored, we'll read a story. Just let me know. Off we go. So Atta Yoga. Okay, Atta Yoga Anushasanam. Do you all have a text? Do you all have a text? I would really invite you and urge you and follow the Sanskrit. I can send a text if you don't have one, and I can just quickly email it to Rebecca. First sutra then. And Patanjali's, as do all sutras, Vedanta Sutra, introduces what his particular sutra is going to be about. Atta, now. Atta means now. So now what are we doing in this sutra? Atta kim bhavati. Atta yoganushāsanam. Now there's going to be the continuation. Anu means continuation of whatever verb, it's a prefix. The continuation of the shasanam, of the teachings of yoga. So Patanjali introduces his text. Vedanta Sutra does the same thing. First sutra of Vedanta. Ataha becomes atato. Brahma Jignasu, that's Vedanta. Now what's the Vedanta going to be about? Brahma Jignasu, the inquiry into Brahman. That's not what Patanjali is going to be inquiring about. In fact, he's not going to be inquiring about anything. He's going to be continuing the teachings of yoga. We'll probably only do these 4 sutras today. We'll see how we do. Okay, so you see the Anushasanam, Atta Yoga. Sanskrit words sometimes get strung together. So there's the Atta, and then there's the Yoga, and then the Anushasanam. Now the Anu is a prefix, continuation. Continuation of what? Anu what? The Shasanam, Shastra, the teachings of yoga. Okay, so this introduces the text, but remember the commentaries are going to unpack this in a myriad different ways. They're going to enliven, they're going to enrich in this first sutra. I'll give you one example of that. They're going to give a gloss on every single word. So one example would be Atta. Well, what does Atta actually mean? Atta now as opposed to what? As opposed to when? As opposed to something previous? As opposed to some other thing? What's the Atta in opposition to? Now. If you say now, does it mean now just like this present moment? Is that all it means? Or does it mean now after something? Now typically means after something. There's a big discussion on this in Vedanta Sutra. Vedanta Sutra also has the first word, Atta. Big discussion. And the Vedantins say, well, Ramanuja would say, well, now you've done all your karma and your ritualism and all this other kind of stuff. Now you're ready. And you become purified by that and disillusioned by that. After becoming disillusioned with fruitive work with, work for desire, work based on desire. After one has realized desires never fulfill, desires are by their very nature unfulfillable and insatiable. Krishna in the Gita compares them to a fire. So the Atta is now you've wandered around samsara for infinite births and finally got a human birth. And even in this birth, you wandered around trying to find happiness here and there in the illusory things of this world, relationships and grand ambitions and this, that, and the other. And after you realize none of them actually satisfy the soul, it doesn't satisfy the mind in a deep place. So now one is ready for inquiry into Brahman, or in this case, now one is ready to hear the teachings of yoga. So now means after being frustrated with other ephemeral and unfulfilling activities. Now could also mean, well, it could also mean now we have a human body. How many living beings are there? Modern science says there's 8,300,000 species. Well, curiously, the ancient Indians said the same thing. There was 8,400,000. And all of those species, if something is alive, it's alive by dint of having having some level of consciousness. And consciousness is the quality of the Atman. So there's an Atman in anything that's alive. That's what that life emanates from the Atman. In Vedanta, yoga, all of these traditions, it's not that it's not a combination of neurons or atoms. So it's not some unique combination of atoms or subatomic particles and forces. It is a non-material thing. So finally, so all of those Atmans, all of those other species, there's Atmans. How do those Atmans get into them, into other species? Why is one Atman in a tree and another in a plant, and one's in a bug, and one's in a bacteria, and one's in a fly, and one's in a lion, and one's in a bird? Well, because of karma. We're going to encounter all this in chapter 2. So therefore, the vast majority of beings are not in human forms. As a matter of fact, 8,400,000 minus 1 species of life are not human. And those other forms cannot seek yoga. They cannot seek Brahman and study Vedanta. They cannot practice yoga as per Patanjali. They cannot do ritualism as per Mimamsa. They're trapped by their karma. They have no agency. There's no free will. They simply are burning up past karma. Dogs do not make fresh karma. Trees do not make fresh karma. Why? Because they're not moral agents. They don't have the sufficient mental, intellectual, yoga would say sattva. They don't have sufficient mental, cognitive resources to even contemplate things like right and wrong and ethics and morality. So they're not agents. They're burning up karma. And then finally, in this one form, the human form, we have the ability, we create karma. We have the ability to reflect. We have notions of right and wrong. Every society known to anthropology, even whatever, cannibals, whatever, they have some moral code. So there's morality in the human form, and therefore in the human form, there's karma. So now finally we got this human form. Who knows how long we've been recycling in samsara? I mean, we've been through who knows how many, 8,400,000, who knows how many of those species we've had to frequent. And maybe we've had human forms in the past and then lost them again, and then, went through the cycle again and again. Indian tradition would say this is infinite. There's no beginning. The soul is eternal. So infinitely recycling through samsara. Now finally, utter, first word. Now we got the human form of life. Are we going to waste it again? Pursuing the same things that the non-humans pursue. What do non-humans pursue? Sense gratification. In fact, they define 4 things of common to humans and animals: eating, sleeping, mating, defending, right? Eating. We may have a very elaborate gastronomic, restaurant and sort of food system. Animals may just forage, but basic function is the same: eating, sleeping. We may have, fancy apartments and city blocks, but essentially it's sleeping. At the end of the day, you sleep. How's that different from a deer under a tree? Mating. We may have a fashion industry and cosmetic industry and all of this and all these elaborate rituals around mating. And, monkeys, whatever, but basically the function is the same. And defending. We may have $1 trillion defense industries as opposed to claws, but the function is the same. So if human life is only dedicated to that, then dvipade pashu, we're 2-legged animals, the yogis would say. So the only function we have that the animals and the other 8,400,000 minus 1 species don't have is this ability to reflect, existential contemplation. This is what distinguishes a human. Why am I here? What is life? Is there life after death? What is the source of this creation? These are basic questions that science then tries to answer through its own methods. Science is, methodologically materialistic. It has to be. That's its dharma. That's its dharma. It has to seek material causations. That's science. Philosophy has to seek rational causation. That's philosophy, reason and argument. And theology. Theology feels that science and philosophy are limited because they're based on sense perception and inferences made from sense perception. Science and philosophy is nothing other than that. You perceive things and you make inferences from those things. So the difference with theology is it doesn't reject that, but it says, well, you're only going to know material things that way. You're only going to know. So therefore, if it's anything that's beyond that, pre-Big Bang, that can only be revealed. This is the position of Vedanta. The first, shastrayonitvat. It can only be known by revelation. So this is what theology does. Theology then tries to present revelation in a philosophical way, in dialogue with science. That's theology itself. It's not blind dogmatism, but it accepts a different source of knowledge. We're going to look at the sources of knowledge later on in chapter 2, right? The three main sources of knowledge. We just mentioned them. That yoga also accepts sense perception, deductive reasoning, inference, and then revelation, words. So otta can also mean now we have a human form. Let's not waste it. Let's not waste it just flapping about like animals in sophisticated garb. But Patanjali says, yoga anushasanam. The commentators say that it can also take it that way. Now we have the human form. Now we can study yoga, practice yoga.